Alice and I are always looking to be more healthy, and we were just talking about how fasting is one of the best ways to do that, but it's so hard. But the great thing about Prolon is that's not what you're doing. It's not that you're not eating for 5 days. Instead, you're using their science-backed program to convince your body you're fasting.
You guys, this 5-day program really is amazing. It comes beautifully packaged and it does all the thinking for you. Each day is its own box. And by following their program, I know I just feel so much better. And I can't wait to experience Prolong Next Gen and continue to see results. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolong is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors.
Do you want to know what it's like to hang out with MS-13 in El Salvador? Or how the Russian mafia fought battles all over Brooklyn in the 1990s?
Or what about that time I got lost in the Burmese jungle hunting the world's biggest meth lab? Or why the Japanese Yakuza have all those crazy dragon tattoos? I'm Sean Williams.
And I'm Danny Gold. And we're the hosts of the Underworld podcast. We're journalists that have traveled all over, reporting on dangerous people and places. And every week, we'll be bringing you a new story about organized crime from all over the world.
We know this stuff because we've been there. We've seen it. And we've got the near misses and embarrassing tales to go with it. We'll mix in reporting with our own experiences in the field, and we'll throw in some bad jokes while we're at it.
The Underworld podcast explores the criminal underworlds that affect all of our lives, whether we know it or not. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, a newlywed couple is murdered in Moab, Utah. Who killed Kylen Schulte and Crystal Turner? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my excellent co-host, Alice.
Brett, you are excellent, because how many other people prepare for trial the night before by recording a completely unrelated criminal
It's
case?
sort of crazy. I don't know if this is highly inappropriate and unprofessional of us or not, but we do have the trial, starting tomorrow. So
but it's also like 9
decided,
p.m.
Why not record again?
It's 9 p.m.
What was that?
It's 9 p.m.
Yes.
You can't just work all the time.
Well, I left all my stuff at the office. I was like, I am ready. I'm leaving this here, and tonight I'm going to have my own night for the last time for the next month. That was my approach. So we're going to record this. It's probably the last time we record for quite some time.
Maybe not. But I did. I know what you mean. I came home and did all my laundry, cleaned my kitchen, did the things that as if you were leaving on a long trip.
I know.
People are like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah. Trial is sort of an all-encompassing thing. It sort of takes over your life. So that's what we're going to be doing. We've been talking about this trial for a long time. We're finally getting it started. It got delayed a couple weeks because of the COVID. But by all accounts, tomorrow we're picking a jury and then we're going. So we'll let you guys know how it goes at the end. If we win, we'll let you know. If we lose, we'll lie about it. So
Well, let's just say, the people who are are Alice and Brett really friends in real life? Yes, all we do is hang out with each other.
It's true. We spend all our time together. If we didn't like each other, it would be a problem, like a big problem, because We podcast together, we work together, our kids hang out together. We don't have any other friends. It's really almost an unhealthy relationship, I think, but, you know.
I think it's
I like
healthy.
unhealthy things. I'm all about the unhealthy.
Anyways, I think everyone has been so patient throughout our JonBenet Ramsey episodes. We have a new case for you today, finally.
We do have a new case for you, and what's interesting about this one is it's an ongoing investigation. This may be the most recent case we've ever done, and the reason we wanted to do it is, as you'll see, this is a murder case, and the police have identified someone they consider to be a person of interest, which is suspect in police lingo these days, but they haven't arrested that person. And what that tells me is they still need something else. They have a pretty good idea of who they're looking at, but they need that last piece of information, that last thing to drop in place that would allow them to make an arrest here and solve this case. So it's a case we wanted to go ahead and do in the hopes that someone out there was in the area at the time, might have seen something or know something that could help the police bring this case to a close. And it's an interesting case that we thought you guys would enjoy. It is the murder of Kylen Schulte and Crystal Turner. You may have seen some about this on television, but it hasn't gotten maybe as much attention as it should. So it was a case we wanted to cover. So I guess with that, let's dive into the story. So on August 25th, 2021, Gabby Petito, who you certainly have heard of, went missing, launching a true crime news story rivaling anything we've seen in recent years. Shortly after her disappearance, video of an August 12th, 2021 interaction between Gabby and her boyfriend, Brian Laundrie, and the Moab police went viral. The police intervened in a fight between Brian and Gabby, a fight that started in front of the Moonflower Co-op. What no one could know is that day, Kylen Schulte was working at the Moonflower Co-op, looking forward to her weekend. The next day, the newly married Kylen and Crystal Turner headed out to celebrate by doing something they loved, camping in the Moab area. Kylen and Crystal, they didn't have a house. They didn't have a place that they lived permanently. Instead, they traveled around the Moab area, camping at various places, enjoying what you might call the van life or the camping life. In Moab, for those of you who've ever been to Utah, you know, it's a beautiful place with lots of wonderful outdoors areas. And so I can imagine that this would be very attractive. Obviously, it was something they were doing by necessity to some extent, but also it had its benefits. But this time, something went wrong. Kylen and Crystal told their friends that there was a creepy guy around their campsite. He unnerved them so much that they were thinking of moving their camp to another location. So when after they told their friends this, the two women went silent, people began to worry. On August 18th, friends searching in the LaSalle Mountains found their bodies. A murder investigation began, which, to this point, has not resulted in any arrest.
Oh, Brett, that's so chilling because most of us have probably seen the police encounter between Gabby Petito and her boyfriend, Brian. And I remember seeing that cafe in the background, right? It was a well-traveled isn't the right thing, but in a place like Moab, it's a well-traveled place because there was a cafe. And to have kind of a just equally as tragic thing stem from that same day is just chilling. That wasn't the day, obviously, that Kylen and Crystal went missing and then found. But how is it possible that such grisly murders can happen so closely together? And if you have been to Moab, actually, I chose to go to Moab right after I graduated to law school. It was the perfect place to go in the midst of, having worked so hard in law school. I wanted to be in nature and free, and it was beautiful. It seems like nothing can hurt you out there because it's just so open, and the natural beauty is riveting. And it is juxtaposed by these just horrific murders.
Yeah, and I think a lot of you who have heard about this case may have only heard of it tangentially to the Gabby Petito case. We're going to talk about that a little more, not really the Gabby Petito case, but the connection there. But it is interesting that you had these two events occur so close in time in a place that in many ways is a paradise in the middle of Utah. And I don't know, some people say that bad things happen in threes. I don't know. These are two bad things that happen and very, very close to each other. It probably is just a coincidence, but it is crazy, particularly because of how much attention was paid to the Gabby Petito case, that something like that captures the world's attention is happening right as this other tragedy is getting ready to occur.
Yeah, so with that, let's dive into the timeline and listen closely because like Brett said at the beginning of this episode, this case is less than a year old. It is not solved. Someone knows something, and as we've said so many times before, memories fade. And each passing day, you get further away from the potential of someone remembering important facts to pass on to the police that could be the censure to be able to make an arrest or to be able to bring charges. So do listen to the timeline closely because you might know something and may not even know it. Kylen is 24 years old and Crystal is 38. But despite the age difference, in 2019, they meet on a hike in the Moab wilderness and they immediately hit it off. And they begin a relationship and everything is going great. So much so that in April of 2021, Crystal and Kylen were married. Now, they are newlyweds and just loving the van life, as we've already stated. They met in the wilderness. They celebrate in the wilderness. They continue to live their life free of the things that maybe tie some people down, like a mortgage or a house that is in one place. They are really just having a great time in life.
And this was really a new beginning for Kylen. Her dad, John Paul, has talked a lot about this and how she had sort of hit a rough patch in life, particularly before they had moved to Moab. She'd had a lot of depression. She'd had some issues she was dealing with. And then they moved to Moab and she meets Crystal, and he says that basically her entire outlook on life changes. All of a sudden she's leaving the depression behind and she sees sort of a reason to live and a future that she can build. And like Alice said, they're married in April 2021, and it just amplifies the tragedy that just as it seemed like things were getting better, this happens. Alice, before we continue, I want to talk about one of our oldest and best sponsors, HelloFresh. Guys, we have been in trial for the last month, and I got to tell you, if it weren't for HelloFresh, I don't think I would have had a good homemade meal in that entire time. But HelloFresh delivers pre-portioned ingredients to your door, including farm-fresh produce that arrives within a week. So you get convenience without skimping on quality. You can skip the trip to the grocery store, saving you the wait in long lines and ensuring you don't waste money on excess food. HelloFresh offers the flexibility you need to easily customize your order online or in the app, easily change your delivery day, food preferences, and plan size, or skip a week whenever you need to.
And Brett, you're right. I would not have made it through trial if it weren't for these pre-packaged perfect meals with recipes and all of the ingredients. In fact, tonight, even though it was the weekend and I wasn't at work, we had surprise visitors and I all of a sudden had to feed a gaggle of friends. It was no problem because I grabbed the sausage and zucchini spaghetti pre-packaged ingredients bag out of my refrigerator and a meal was ready within 20 minutes for all of my friends, and I didn't even have to go to the grocery store, and they loved it. Everyone wanted the recipe. And as you all know, Green Chef is now owned by HelloFresh, and with a wider array of meal plans to choose from, there's something for everyone. I love switching between the brands, and now our listeners can enjoy both brands at a discount on us. Go to HelloFresh.com/TP16 and use code TP16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 free gifts. That's HelloFresh.com/TP16 and use code TP16 and find out for yourself why HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit. Brett, we've got a very different kind of sponsor for this episode, The Jordan Harbinger Show, which is a podcast you really should be listening to. And I know that every day somebody tells you that you just have to listen to some podcast, and you nod and say, sure, and then you never listen to it. Don't let that happen here. Jordan's show, which Apple named one of its best of 2018, is aimed at making you a better informed and more critical thinker so you can get a sense of how the world actually works and come to your own conclusions about what's happening even inside your own brain.
Yeah, Alice, and there's something for everybody, including those of you who love true crime. Check out the episode with Sammy the Bull Gravano and learn more about the mafia. Or if you're interested in knowing how to spot a psychopath and maybe even learn some things about yourself, check out the episode, Are You a Psychopath? Each episode is a conversation with a different, fascinating guest. And when I say there's something for everyone, I truly mean it. If you're interested in things like hostage negotiation, Jordan Harbinger has interviewed an FBI hostage negotiator who offers techniques on how to get people to like and trust you, which frankly sounds kind of useful and disturbing at the same time.
We really enjoy this show, and we think you will as well. Search for The Jordan Harbinger Show. That's HARB as in boy, IN as in Nancy, GER on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/Wondery.
Bombas makes the most comfortable socks, underwear, and T-shirts.
Warning, Bombas are so absurdly comfortable you may throw out all your other clothes.
Sorry, do we legally have to say that?
No, this is just how I talk, and I really love my Bombas.
They do feel that good. And they do good, too. One item purchased equals one item donated.
To feel good and do good, go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code Wondery for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code Wondery at checkout.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Just a few short months later, on August 13th, 2021, Crystal and Kylen go to Woody's Tavern on Friday night to meet friends for drinks. While at the bar, the two women tell their friends about this strange man who was camping next to their campsite on LaSalle Loop Road. He'd been watching them, they thought, and he gave them the creeps. In fact, Kylen told a friend with a laugh, if something happens to us, we were murdered. They left the bar around 10:30 that night. But later that night, Kylen texted a friend that the man was back and that they might need to move campsites. Then their phones went silent. 3 days later, on August 16th, neither Crystal nor Kylen showed up for work. This was unthinkable, as both women were known to be reliable. Friends and family who had been worried when they didn't hear from the two were now very concerned. They reported them missing to the police. The next day, on August 17th, once again, the women did not show up for work. Friends are really starting to get worried now because this is completely uncharacteristic of Kylen and Crystal.
Yeah, and it's interesting because something we're going to talk about later is the reaction of the police. They were reported to the police on August 16th, and this is not sort of an idle thing. This Friday night meeting on August 13th, I mean, yeah, they're kind of joking around with the whole, if something happens to us, we were murdered. I mean, we've all said things like that. You know, you've all made a joke to your friend about, well, if I don't come back, you'll know what happened to me or whatever. But here it seems like that joke has taken on a very serious, dangerous overtone. And
no, Brett, I think that's right. I think they're making light of it, partly probably because they're nervous, but then any jokiness is undercut by the text that comes later that night.
Right, exactly. I mean, there's a lot of red flags here, right? I mean, we talk about all the time your intuition, and I'm a big believer in intuition. I just think you should follow your intuition and don't convince yourself that your intuition is wrong. And I think these women, they had an intuition that this person who was near the campsite was dangerous and was a threat. And yeah, I think you're right. You know, they're making the joke, but they're serious. Then this text sort of confirms things. I mean, you guys know how it is. You go out to the bar, you have some drinks with friends. The last thing you want to do in the middle of the night is move your campsite. You know, you don't want to do that. You know, you don't come home from the bar and decide to clean your kitchen, right? You just go to bed. And these ladies are so concerned about what's going on that even after a night out with friends, they're talking about moving their campsites, and then we don't hear from them again. Okay, so August 13th is when they go to the bar. They're reported missing on August 16th. They don't come back to work on the next day. August 18th, a friend of the women, Cindy Sue Hunter, decides to take matters into her own hands. The police don't seem like they're too interested in doing anything, so she goes out on a search for the women. She goes to the McDonald's where Turner works, and she finds her van parked in the parking lot, which was not unusual. It was a place she would often leave her van, but the fact that it was there meant that she probably had not come back from camping, particularly given that she had never reported to work at the McDonald's where she worked. So Cindy knew that they had mentioned they were camping on this LaSalle Loop Road. And we're going to put a map of this area up on the website so you guys can take a look at it later. But she knows that's where they are, or that's where they were. They were out on this LaSalle Loop Road, and so she decides she's going to go out to the area and see if she can find anything. So she drives down this road. She passes something called Whispering Oaks Ranch, and she spots a Kia Sorento that she recognized as the women's. So she parks her car behind this Sorento. She gets out, and she makes her way a few feet down into the wilderness, heading towards this creek. Soon, she finds the campsite, and she's actually on the phone with Kylen's father, Sean Paul, talking to him as she's arriving at this campsite. And she will later say that it was completely silent, that it just didn't seem like there was anything that was moving there. The tent was still up, and the women's gear was kind of spread about. So it seemed like if they were planning on leaving, they had not packed up. But like I said, there were no sounds, and there were no people. She makes her way down to the creek, and that's when she sees Kylen. She finds her body. She's partially undressed, and she is obviously dead. She has multiple gunshot wounds. It does not take her long to find Crystal's body nearby in the same state, partially undressed and shot to death several times.
First of all, Cindy is such a good friend to come down, but we've talked a lot about how difficult it is to find people in the wilderness. The Delphi search went on for more than a day before the girls were located not far from where they were known to last be. Obviously, we have many, many cases we've covered of missing persons where we've said they're probably close by and just not found. And this is borne out in the recent discovery in the Brandon Lawson case, where his remains were found very close to his last known location. And that's because when you go into the wilderness with the elements and with critters about who could begin to help decompose a body, it is very possible to walk by a body in the wilderness and not find it, even if it's close by. So the fact that Cindy found them so quickly is very lucky, and also could be a bit surprising.
Yeah, I think it could be surprising. I think it's also a real indictment on the police. And we're going to talk more about the police as we go on. I mean, we're sort of going to talk about the police throughout this, but the fact that this lady had to find these bodies while she's on the phone with one of their fathers that shouldn't have happened. I don't, she did a great job, and she followed the clues, and she found the girls. But this did not require Sherlock Holmes. This was not a difficult trail to follow. If the police had put any effort into this at all, if they just sent a patrol car out there to look around, they would have found these bodies, and they would have spared her finding them. I don't know. It seems like she did all the right things. She found the bodies. She backed out. She called the police. She didn't mess with the scene. But nevertheless, it's always better to have the police find the bodies. We talked about this with John Bonet. The police know what they're doing. They know how to handle the scene. They know how to record their own interactions with the scene, so that to the extent the scene is contaminated, they can point that out. They can identify anything they may have left behind. And if the police had gone out there on August 16th, I don't know how much evidence they lost in those couple days. It's hard to say. We don't know a whole lot of details in this case because this is an ongoing investigation. But you got to think, if the police had been out there on the 16th, it would have been better. It would have been worse. It certainly would have been better to find the bodies earlier. And like I said, they would have spared this poor lady having to do this herself. But that didn't happen, so she had to take matters into her own hand, and it's just fortunate that they had a friend like her who was willing to do that. So obviously a murder investigation starts at this point, and it doesn't take long for this story to be subsumed into the Gabby Petito story. I remember when this story broke, and just a couple days, maybe the day the bodies were found, I remember seeing this, and somebody might even send it to me on Twitter. I can't remember, but it was a story for a little while, and then the whole Gabby Petito thing happened. It happened in Moab, and it really just sucked the oxygen out of this story. And to the extent this story was discussed at all, it was discussed in relation to Gabby Petito, the fact that she was missing, and because these two incidents had happened so close together. It's like Alice was saying earlier. It seems strange. What a coincidence that you have two murders that happen in the same area. So there were people who wondered whether Brian Laundrie had anything to do with this, and that became something the police had to deal with. On September 18th, about a month after the bodies were found, the police did confirm that there was no connection between the murder and the death of Gabby Petito. That's not very surprising to me. It's pretty obvious that what happened to Gabby Petito was the result of domestic violence and violence by a significant other. Crystal and Kylen didn't have that relationship with Brian. I'm not saying that Brian Laundrie was above killing other people or hurting other people, but it's pretty clear that what happened was a domestic violence situation. So it's not surprising that he's not a serial killer, for instance, who just happened to murder several people in Moab. So it doesn't surprise me that there's no connection, and I don't think there's a connection. So to the extent there are still people out there who are trying to draw a connection, I think it's pretty clear there's not one. After that, everything kind of goes silent. The police are doing their work. They're investigating this. They're not speaking out a lot. There's a lot of criticism from the family about that. The family is they're out there. They're looking for justice. They want to know what's going on. On January 22nd, 2022, we have sort of our first big break. And that's when the police announce that they do have a person of interest in the murders. But that was a month ago when we're recording this, almost exactly a month ago. So in that month, even though the police have announced they have a person of interest, we haven't had any movement forward. At this point, we don't know who this person is, and obviously they have not been arrested. I think this is interesting because I don't think the police would have announced that they have a person of interest unless they were pretty close to an arrest. Unless they were trying to affect that person.
So let's talk about that, because you heard that, September 18th, the police say something, which is that this case is not related to Gabby Petito's case. And then it seems to fall silent for 4 months. So you all may be thinking, what happens in those 4 months? No, the police are not sitting on their hands. Likely the fact that they made an announcement, 4 months later that they have a person of interest leads me to believe that they were actively investigating the case. So I have no insight into what they actually did in this case, but just from our experience in investigating these types of cases, they likely, if there were any trail cameras, if there was any footage, whether from the McDonald's parking lot to the trails to the bar they were at that night, they will try to gather all of that footage quickly, because that stuff, especially if it's by a private business, is usually recorded over. So you have to move quickly on those. They're usually on a loop because, tapes are expensive and there's no need to keep, gigabytes of old surveillance tapes as a private business. But they'll gather those, watch those. That could take some time because there's probably a lot of dead space in the surveillance cameras, probably not a lot of stuff happening. And then they try to identify everyone that these women would have talked to that night at the bar, anyone who may have camped in the area the week before, the week during, the week after the women were there. That can take a while because Moab is not typically somewhere that people live or stay for a long time. Usually it is a tourist attraction where people come and camp for a little bit and then move their campsite. And so I can imagine that's difficult to find because you have to identify the people and then find them. They may not be from the area. They may be from anywhere in the world, actually. And then maybe things like geofence warrants. We've talked about those before. Warrants to see if there were any phones that ping in this area. Now this, we know that at least Kylen was texting people that night, so there's probably cell service. But I've been in many parts of Moab where I did not have the greatest cell phone reception, and that's part of the charm of going there, is being able to shut out the world a bit, especially if this guy had been at the campsite for several days. It sounds like it wasn't just that night. It had been for at least a little bit of time, so much so that the women noticed him, that he was creeping them out. So I can imagine that they have subpoenaed records. Now, remember, those records take time because they belong to a third-party company, and those companies receive a lot of subpoena requests. They comply, but they have a certain amount of time to get back to the police. Once that data comes back, if they do request that data, it's usually a very large amount of data. And they have to sift through it and analyze it and see if anything looks suspicious. So if they did all that in 4 months, I think there's more than enough to do in 4 months. I don't think they were sitting on their hands. Now, with respect to what you said, Brett, whether they actually have someone in mind or they're trying to do like a press conference, a la press conference of like Delphi, where they're trying to scare someone into coming forward, I don't know. The reason I don't think they're just trying to get someone to misstep is this case has not gotten the media attention that Delphi did or that Gabby Petito's case did. And so probably not a lot of people are following it. The killer may certainly be following it, but it's not getting, the kind of 24-hour coverage that Gabby Petito's case did. So I tend to think that those tactics are used when you know you have a big stage. And the police really don't have a huge stage in this case with respect to public attention. Prosecutors Podcast is brought to you by Progressive. Progressive helps you get a great rate on car insurance, even if it's not with them. They have this nifty comparison tool that puts rates side by side, so you choose a rate and coverages that work for you. So let's say you're interested in lowering your rate on your car insurance. Visit progressive.com to get a quote with all the coverages you want. You'll see Progressive's rate, and then their tool will provide options from other companies, all lined up and easy to compare, so that all you have to do is choose the rate and coverages you like. Progressive gives you options so you can make the best choice for you.
You could be looking forward to saving money in the very near future. More money for, say, a pair of noise-canceling headphones, an Instapot, more puzzles, whatever brings you joy. Get a quote today at Progressive.com. It's one small step you can do today that could make a big impact on your budget tomorrow. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. Yeah, there's a couple things I want to comment on about that. Number one, I think what you said is really important and something that people miss. I think this is part of the CSI effect. Investigations take a really long time. And in any case where it's more complicated than, you pull somebody over and they've got drugs. Okay, well, that investigation is pretty simple. But even then, you got to send the drugs off for testing and what kind of drugs they are and what purity they are, and that's going to take time. A case like this where you have a double murder, but not by someone that the women knew. Whoever did this was somebody that was creeping them out, not somebody they knew. This would have been a stranger thing. As we've said, those are the hardest murders to solve because there's not an easy connection to make. So you got to do a lot of investigating. It's kind of like Delphi. There's a lot of investigating you have to do to figure out who this is, and every single one of those things you're doing is taking so much time. Like Alice said, you send a warrant off for cell tower data. That's going to take a while. So it's not surprising that it has taken them some time. It hadn't taken them that long. I mean, this is not a long investigation. This case is not cold by any stretch of the imagination. And I think that goes in to what Alice was saying on the second part. Unlikely that this is just a tactic to shake people up, because this is not a cold case. This is very much an ongoing investigation, very much a hot investigation. So I think if the police say they have a suspect, they do. Now, I do think they need one or two more pieces of information, which, as I said at the beginning, is one of the reasons we wanted to do this case.
Right, so let's talk about some unusual aspects surrounding this murder that might give us some insight into what happened or who did this. The weekend of the murders, there was a wedding being held at the Whispering Oaks Ranch, which was less than half a mile from the women's campsite. It was attended by about 100 people, and from the elevated location of the ranch, anyone who knew where to look would have been able to see Kylen and Crystal's campsite. But as of now, no one has come forward with any information, and some have criticized the police for not canvassing all those guests. Now, Brett, this is hard, right? I have been to weddings and also been to kind of national parks or beautiful locations where a wedding was held, and weddings have the effect of kind of making you focus inwards, right? There's usually some barrier to keep out other people. There's lights so that everything around you, if you've been to Moab, Brett, it is pitch black. The sky is amazing, lit up with stars at night. But without your own source of light, a campfire, a flashlight, it's incredibly dark. One of the most beautiful darknesses you can experience for those of us who live near any sort of an urban setting, because we're always surrounded by lights. Not so in Moab. So I can imagine if you're at a wedding in the midst of Moab, there's obviously going to be a wedding with lights, and I'm not sure you can see much past those lights, or that you'd be thinking about much past the lights, because there's probably music, there's probably food, there's drinking, there's dancing, and the party is right there. You may step out for a breath of fresh air, but I'm not sure that the average guest would be paying that much attention to the darkness beyond, which is actually where the women's campsite was.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think this is a red herring. I mean, maybe the police should have talked to everybody, but 100%, a wedding is a universe unto itself. I mean, that's sort of the whole point, is it's all about what's going on at the wedding. And there's something poignant and something philosophically stirring about the fact that there was a wedding with all that joy and all that happiness that was probably going on at the same time that these women half a mile away were being brutally murdered. But beyond that, I don't think there's any way that anyone at the wedding would have any real information. Having said that, the one thing I'll say that would have been valuable in talking to the wedding guest, I have a feeling that whoever did this probably hightailed it out of there right afterwards. And so it would have been nice to know if anyone saw a car driving recklessly or at high speed away from the area. Possibly one of the guests could have seen someone along those lines. I think that is about the only thing you might have gotten from this wedding. And, you know, the wedding was that weekend. I'm not sure if it was on a Friday or a Saturday. If I had to guess, I would say it was a Saturday. I think probably by the time this wedding happened, the murder had been completed. I think this murder probably happened that Friday night after they got back. Why do I say that? Because they were talking about moving their campsite, but they didn't, and they hadn't packed their stuff up. And I don't think they would have stayed there another day. Nobody heard from them the next day. I think before they could move, they were murdered. So they were murdered late Friday night, early Saturday morning. Whenever this wedding happened, it would not have been when the murder was occurring, in my view. So I agree with you. I think this is probably a red herring and a dead end.
And that's a great point about the time of probable death here, Brett. Remember, they left the bar at 10:30. They were texting friends after that. And something must have happened that night that creeped them out so much that when most of us, you leave friends, we, just go home and sleep. It caused Kylen to text a friend. I don't know what it was, but it was probably escalating. He was already a creepy guy, but his actions were escalating, and they probably escalated to the climax that night.
Yeah, I think that's right. So another thing that's strange about this case are some comments made by the police. I am sure this investigation is being handled very well, but some of the things the police have done in the beginning, not really taking this seriously, and then these comments have made you question just how good an investigation this is going to be. It's all I'll say about that. So within days of the body being found, the sheriff's office released a statement saying, "The evidence that we've gathered at this time, that's what led us to believe this was an isolated incident." Now, this is a very strange statement. In fact, it's the kind of statement that would make you believe this was a murder-suicide or an acquaintance murder. If there were a stranger who committed these crimes, then I'm not sure how it's possible that this would be an isolated incident and that they could be sure that there's no danger to the public. And in fact, the sheriff's office went out of its way to say there was, quote, "no current danger to the public," a statement which enraged the family. Now, we have talked about before, and this happened in Delphi, that on occasion, the police will make statements like this to avoid panic. It's almost been confirmed that that's what happened in Delphi, that the reason the police were making statements about how there was no reason to be concerned and there was no reason to worry is they didn't want to panic the public. Maybe that's what's going on here, but it doesn't seem to fit with what we know about this crime.
Absolutely, Brett. Having a murder in Moab itself is
rare, very rare thing.
Right. And I wonder if they were trying to thread the needle and say this is an isolated incident in that it hardly ever happens here. But obviously that's not the effect of the words. The effect of the words is what you said, that it's likely a murder-suicide or they knew who it was. But they didn't know who this creepy man was, which is likely who committed this crime. Otherwise, they would have told their friends, Man, we saw Bill. Bill was being super weird and creepy to us. They didn't know who this guy was.
Right. It's just like it's funny we keep coming back to Delphi because there are some similarities to this. In Delphi, you have a video and some audio. In this case, you have text messages. And just like in Delphi, we've said we don't think the girls knew the person because if they did, you would expect that you would hear them on the tape as they're recording saying something, identifying the person. And I think the same thing here. If they had known who this was, they wouldn't have called him some creepy guy. They would have said to their friends who it was, or they would have texted who it was, and they didn't do that.
Right. Let's talk more about the police. Initially, when the two women were reported missing, the police were slow to respond, as we've already noted. They suggested to the family that given the women didn't have a fixed address and were known to move from their campsite often, it was probably as simple as that. They'd moved their campsite and neglected to tell anyone. The police were not receptive to the idea that they would not have behaved in this manner. So this case reveals a weakness that is inherent in many police departments. They do not handle different circumstances well because what the police are saying generally makes sense, right? You can imagine. I don't think this is malicious. I think generally with that set of facts, no fixed address, they're camping, they're young and like to do this sort of thing where they change their campsites often. Sure, maybe they're just off the grid for a few extra days as they go camping. Except Kylen and Crystal's friends and family know them well, and they got that disturbing text. Now, the police should have listened more closely to these specific facts, and those texts that night should concern them. That should change their general protocol, right? That should throw them off their normal protocol, which they did not do here.
Yeah, I think you put your finger on it. The police typically, they have limited resources. They can't investigate everything, so they like to play the percentages, right? And if the percentages tell them that this is probably not a serious thing, then they take it less seriously. And I think because these women didn't have a fixed address, they didn't take it as seriously. I think if these ladies had owned a home or lived in an apartment and the exact same thing happened. I mean, imagine they were supposed to go back to their apartment. Nobody heard from them. They didn't show up for work. I just think it would have been much simpler for the police just to drive out to the apartment and check. I think they would have done that without a second thought. But because of this camping situation, they didn't do that. And this time, when they played the percentages, they lost. And there had been a crime committed here and a more robust police response. We don't know this, and we may not know until an arrest happens, until we have a trial. But it could have, there could have been evidence that was lost in the meantime. And that's just unfortunate, and hopefully something that this police department will learn from. So let's talk about the murder weapon. As we said, the women were shot multiple times. A few weeks before the murders, firearms were stolen in the Moab area that may be related to the crime. Now, thefts of firearms happen all the time, so this is not exactly news. But in this case, the police have said that one of the weapons was unique. It was a Turkish-made 9mm, which is not a weapon you see that often. Now, we don't know really a whole lot about it beyond that. I mean, some of you who are into firearms, you may know what a Turkish-made 9mm is. There may only be a few of them. But we've also heard that the ammunition itself was unique. Apparently, at the campsite where the women were found, there were shell casings from a 9mm that were silver in color. And apparently these bullets are not that common, and you would have to do a little bit extra to have these bullets. These are the kind of things that are a gold mine for a police investigation. Anything that's different, anything that's unique, dramatically narrows down what you're looking at. 9mm, probably the most popular caliber of firearm in America today. If you own a firearm, if you own a handgun, you probably own a 9mm. So that in of itself is not that unique. But the fact it's this Turkish-made 9mm, the fact that they have these different kind of bullets, is important and is unique. Every weapon creates a fingerprint essentially when it fires a bullet. It's every weapon is unique, and the way that these weapons affect the bullets is unique. So hopefully this is the kind of information that they can use to tie back to whoever did this.
Absolutely. I think ballistic testing is so interesting. Like, a smashed piece of metal can tell you so much. As you said, it's like a fingerprint of the gun. As we've noted, police have identified a person of interest, but they have not arrested them. It's likely that they have put the person at the location, but have yet to connect him to the murders. This would not surprise me if this was done through, as I noted earlier, a geofence warrant that put this person's phone in the vicinity of the area. And because of the remoteness of the campsite, he may have been the only person there. Because they didn't say we have people of interest. They said we have a person of interest. So if you have Kylen and Crystal and their phones pinging in this area and one other person's phone, and you trace it back to a man, which would match the description of creepy guy that Kylen gave to friends, that's pretty good evidence right there, right? But without anything more than that, you can't just arrest someone for being physically in a location that they're allowed to be, right? That campsite is public. It's available to anyone who wants to camp there. So just because this person is there is not enough to arrest him. They have to somehow find a connection between him and the murders, whether that be he bought this gun, he has a Turkish-made gun, or he recently bought silver bullets, or that friends and family or neighbors noted that he was missing for a few days, and then when he came home, he threw away all his clothes and changed his appearance. Those sorts of things that can maybe give you more cause to then take the next step of searching. Or they have fingerprints that can come back to him. Now, he may not be in any sort of criminal database. Maybe he's never been an offender. To have his fingerprints or DNA in a database. And so even if they do have DNA or fingerprints, it may not have hit against the known database. So they can't just, well, they can actually ask him for a fingerprint, but they need probable cause to do so.
I think that is highly likely that this is the result of a geofence warrant or something similar. I mean, that just feels like what's going on here. We talked about geofence warrants before. To remind you guys, your cell phone can tell on you in a couple different ways. One way is cell phone tower pings. And so basically, your cell phone, when it's connecting to cell phone towers to make telephone calls and send text and everything else, the way it interacts with the towers can, through triangulation, identify where your phone is. I mean, your phone's pinging off different towers. It's pretty easy using some basic geometry, maybe trigonometry. I feel like we had this debate last time. Is it geometry or trigonometry? To to locate where you are using that. But that is not that accurate. There's some problems with it. Your phone's pinging off towers for different reasons. We used to think it was a little bit more accurate than we do now. So cell phone tower pings, while useful, are not really the perfect way to identify where someone is. Geofence warrants are pretty good because geofence warrants are using the data that your phone is sending back and forth to various apps. The company that gets the most geofence warrant applications is Google. That probably doesn't surprise you. Google knows where you are all the time. If you have any Google apps on your phone and you're planning on committing a crime, you might want to leave your phone behind, because if you do one of these geofence warrants, you send it off to Google, they can tell the police every phone in that area, in that fence, wherever the little area they fenced off, where that phone was, how long it was there, where it moved. We talked about the privacy implications of that before. Geofence warrants are often difficult to get because they do implicate privacy so much, which is why we are lucky that here in Moab is such a isolated place, because you can very easily make the case to a judge, look, judge, chances are the only people who were in this area were the ladies who've been murdered and the murderer. And that's about it. There might be one other person, maybe. But most likely there aren't. So the privacy implications for a ordinary person, an innocent bystander, are very low here. So it would not surprise me if the police got one of those warrants, identified someone who was there, and now, like Alice said, that's great. It's great to know that person. but you still need a little bit more. And they're looking for a little bit more, and hopefully they will find it. So let's talk about some theories in this case, and then it'll be time for you guys to go off, and if you know anything, share it with the police. I think the first theory is murder-suicide. Now, I confess, when I first heard this story, I really felt like that would be the outcome. And then when you hear the comments by the police about how there's no threat to the public, then you start to think this is a tragedy, a domestic violence tragedy, a murder-suicide type situation, just like the Gabby Petito case turned out to be. But if that were the case, the police would have said so by now, and they would have said so definitively. Instead, they have announced that they have ruled out a murder-suicide. They've announced that they have this person of interest. So I think this is a theory that when you didn't know anything, and really, whenever you hear about a couple and they've both died, they've been murdered, this is always a theory that's in the back of your head until it gets eliminated. It has been eliminated here, and I think this is the theory we can discard.
I think you're right, Brett. So then who could have done this? Well, the last time the women were seen, they were at the local bar. It's possible, of course, that someone followed them home from the bar and murdered them. Of course, we have no real evidence of this. Moreover, although bars are common hunting grounds for murderers, the fact that there were two of them makes it less likely that a random stranger would target them because, as we said before, double murders are just harder to pull off and to get away with because one person can get away while you're killing one. One of them can yell, the other one can try to gouge your eyes out. There's just 2 against 1 is usually not what you would pick if you were looking for an easy kill. And not to mention that they didn't note, and the friends didn't note, that there was anyone creepy at the bar or anyone following them out of the bar. And there's probably surveillance of that, or at least lots of witnesses to testify if something like that had happened.
Yeah, there's definitely strength in numbers, and people often talk about never going anywhere alone. It's not that no one's ever targeted 2 people before, but it's much rarer. And if it happens, the chance of surviving is much higher. We talked about this even in Delphi when you have kids. It's rare to target 2 at once. Here you have 2 grown women. Doesn't mean this theory isn't possible. In this theory, the creepy guy at the camp would basically be a red herring. That's a distraction. He's creepy and he's camping there, but he's actually harmless. And the real threat was coming from the bar. But although this is possible, as Alice said, there's no real evidence of it. The police have looked at the surveillance cameras from the bar. They've actually released photographs of the women in the bar, and it doesn't seem that they've seen anything unusual, nothing to indicate anyone was stalking them or following them. So another possibility is that this is some sort of drug deal gone bad. So after the women were killed, the police did execute a search warrant on the van that they had left at the McDonald's. During this search, the police found drug paraphernalia. The van was searched as part of the investigation, which might lead one to believe that the police thought that someone they knew was involved in this crime. And the drugs that were found have led some to think this might have been some sort of drug deal gone wrong. Of course, it's also possible, and I think maybe even likely, that this is just a shot in the dark. The police wanted to see what was in the vehicle, and they executed a warrant to do so. They most likely used the warrant just in case a third party would have some sort of privacy interest in the van that they could later claim to suppress any evidence found. And I think this is an important thing to note. People assume, well, they got a search warrant. They got a search warrant for the van, so the van must be connected to the crime. Otherwise, why would they get a search warrant? Why do they need a search warrant? It's the women's van. They're both dead. You can just go look inside of it. The problem is you never know who might have a privacy interest in a van or a house or anything else. It's not just the owner that has a privacy interest. The privacy law is really complicated, and we won't spend all night on it, but if you are someone who, in the eyes of the law, a reasonable person would think has an expectation of privacy in something, then you have a constitutional right to not have it searched without a warrant. So, for instance, say you're an overnight guest at somebody's home. If you were in your house sleeping in your bed, you would obviously have a privacy right in your home. Well, under certain circumstances, just because you're a guest in somebody else's house doesn't mean that you have no privacy interest there. And it could be a similar thing here. We just don't know who might pop up and claim, you know what, that I own that van too, and I used to stay in that van, and I have all these privacy interests, and so everything you found, now you have to throw it out. So what the police will often do is they go ahead and get that warrant, have the courts bless it, show that they have probable cause to search it, and then if somebody does pop up, it doesn't matter because your privacy interest is trumped by this warrant. So that's why they did that. Now, other than the presence of drugs in the van, there's no real evidence that this was a drug deal gone bad. And we're not talking about large quantities of drugs here. We're talking about, some marijuana and stuff like that. So I think the chances this is a drug deal gone bad, particularly given everything we know, very low.
And I mean, like I said, when I went to Moab, there was drug paraphernalia like marijuana pipes sold everywhere. I mean, they were beautifully painted. They were memorabilia. They were used. I don't think it's a surprise that these women, or probably a lot of the people that hang out with, did smoke some marijuana. It's not uncommon, especially when it's very peaceful. They're out there. We're not condoning it, just simply noting that in a kind of more free place like Moab, you see it and you smell it everywhere. So it is not uncommon for them to have some marijuana.
Yeah, and I gotta say, I just feel like there are times when the police release information that, I don't know, it feels sketchy. We talked about this in the, or we haven't talked about it yet. I think this has happened a little bit in the Jason Landry case. Those of you who listened to our episode on that may know that the police recently released some information, more information about his drug use and that he might have been smoking marijuana that night. And I just don't know that that has much to do with his disappearance. So I don't really know why they're doing that. I kind of wonder if it's part of a press push because of Jason's father being so aggressive and wanting them to investigate. I wonder, the family in this case have been very critical of the police and very vocal, and I kind of wonder if this information might have been released for similar reasons to sort of imply that the women were hanging out with the wrong crowd, and so maybe somehow this is their own fault. I don't know that that's the case. I'm not going to accuse the police of doing that, but I don't know. This stuff just seems a little sketchy to me. It just doesn't surprise me that there was drug paraphernalia, like Alice said. It just isn't surprising. So I think this is one of those that you can and should put to bed very quickly and move on from. I don't think it's significant in this case.
I agree with you. So then let's talk about the most obvious theory, which is one that Kylen and Crystal suggested. If they were murdered, it was the creepy guy who was camped near them. There are several reasons to think this. First, your intuition's usually right. If they thought that this man was dangerous, he probably was. They camped a lot in these areas. They lived in this area. They worked in this area. They were not newbies at camping. This was their lifestyle. So they have camped in many different campsites. They have camped next to a lot of people. They probably made friendly conversation with people. It's a very friendly atmosphere because everyone's kind of camping, doing their own thing. They are not novices. So if they think this man was creepy or dangerous, they probably were right. Second, to kill Kylen and Crystal, the person had to first find them. The area where they camped wasn't the most remote in the world, but it wasn't exactly easy to find either. It's a campsite. It doesn't exist unless you put a tent up. They chose to camp there. You could find it generally on a map, but there's not an easy X marks the spot. This is where Kylen and Crystal are tonight. You had to turn down a pretty rural road to get where they were. And the chances of someone else finding the women and killing them that night is just kind of unlikely. The women were found partially undressed, which seems to indicate some sort of sexual assault. Whether this was the motive or an act of power over two lesbian women, we will only know once this person of interest is located. But it is noteworthy that they were both partially undressed. And we say that it could be either sexual assault or power because people who murder others, there are strange things that go on in their minds, of course. And one of those things is exerting power, whether it be putting them in demeaning poses or just undressing someone. Think about it. When you're undressed, when you're caught naked, you quite literally are put in a position of inferiority, right? You cover yourself, you are demeaned. And so if he had partially undressed them either before or after they killed him, it could be a sign of just demeaning them to show dominance over them. Or it could mean that he sexually assaulted them. That's very possible as well. But I note those things because it could be, the police haven't noted anything about sexual assault, but of course all our minds go to potential sexual assault because of the partial undressing.
And I wonder about sexual assault just because if you have a person of interest, then if there were a sexual assault, you would assume you'd have a lot of physical evidence that you could compare against this person of interest. Not necessarily. Obviously, a few days had passed, but particularly 2 victims, the chances you don't have something, if they were sexually assaulted, seems pretty low, but you never know. The fact that they haven't arrested the person yet makes me wonder about that. But hopefully, this is a case that will come to a close sometime in the very near future. And it might come to a close because of something one of you knows out there. If you have any information on this case, you should contact the Grand County Sheriff's Office at 435-259-8115. That's 435-259-8115, and we will put that contact information on the website in case you need to find it later. This is like I said, this is a hot case. This is a hot investigation. This only happened in August. It can be solved. It should be solved. Somebody out there probably has information. I hope you guys will reach out to us and let us know what you thought about this case. Shoot us up at prosecutorspod@gmail.com or at prosecutorspod on all your social media. On Facebook, you can visit the gallery and join in the discussion there. We also have a subreddit on Reddit if you prefer that platform. Or if you're listening to us and you're tired of the ads, feel free to join our Patreon where you'll get ad-free episodes and some other goodies as well. Hello to everyone listening on Patreon. Sorry that we have been neglecting you, which we almost certainly have been doing during this trial. But I hope you guys will stick it out with us because even though we're recording the day before the trial started, by the time you hear this, the trial will probably be over. So cross your fingers.
I hope it is, Brett.
If it's not, we got a problem on multiple levels. But, well, Alice, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, but I do hope someone knows something. So if you do, please contact the police or let us know. We're happy to pass that along as well.
And now for an update. I feel like I should use the Unsolved Mysteries music here if they weren't going to sue us if we did it. So immediately after we recorded this episode, more information was released on the suspect, and initially it seemed very optimistic. According to this information, which was revealed when the police released a search warrant, the police had one person who they were interested in from the very beginning of this investigation. It was a 27-year-old man who'd been pulled over only a day after the 2 women were reported missing. It was a routine traffic stop. The person was acting suspiciously, which always clues the police in to something might be wrong. This was someone who often slept in their vehicle, someone who the police had learned had a history of making unwanted advances towards women, advances that often made them feel uneasy. He was asked if he knew Kylen, and he admitted that he had seen her in the Moonflower regularly. He was vague about their interactions and generally just appeared to be suspicious. He was also someone that apparently had some mental illness, and even though when asked outright if he killed the two women, he said no. He was a definite suspect the police were very interested in. They sought a search warrant for some clothes, and they thought they had a good suspect, and I am pretty sure this is the person of interest that we heard so much about. Unfortunately, on February 23rd, the police issued a press release on this individual explaining that they had seized a blanket and a jacket owned by this person that was seized from his campsite. But after looking at these items, I'm sure doing some DNA testing, some other forensic analysis, they determined that he was not involved in this incident. Now, that tells me a couple things. Most notably, I think there probably is DNA that the police have, because otherwise, I don't know how they could rule this person out just based on a jacket and a blanket. But they say that they have ruled this person out as a suspect. So, in many ways, that means we are back to square one. Now, there has been an additional update. According to Kylen's father, there's a source that has told him there is audio recording of gunshots near the location of the murder. And according to him, those gunshots occurred at 11:35 in the morning of August 14th, which is surprising. I think, as we said in the show, we expected that this murder probably happened at night. So if it happened at 11:35, it means despite the fact the women were feeling unusual about this person, they didn't move their campsite. They went ahead and went to sleep, and the murder occurred around noon. The police would not confirm this 11:35 story, but they would say that it happened in the AM of August 14th. Now, obviously that could have been at 1 o'clock in the morning, but it is interesting. And I would just note once again, if you were in the area, just go ahead for your purposes and assume that this happened at 11:35. If you were in the area at 11:35 that day, think back to anything you might have seen, anything you might have heard. It feels like we're kind of back at square one in this investigation now that this person of interest, assuming it's the same one, which I think it is, has been eliminated. So we need everybody to really think about this case if we're going to solve it. One thing I'll say about the gunshots, you might think, well, if there were gunshots at 11:35 in the morning, clearly that was the murderer. Not necessarily. I know this is probably weird for some of you guys who live in cities, but I grew up in the middle of the country. We shot guns all the time. All the time. You know, gunshots were not an unusual thing to hear because people were out in their backyard shooting their guns into the woods or whatever. So Moab is a similar area. Probably a lot of people who own firearms there. Might just be somebody who on a Saturday decided to go out shooting. So we don't know that these gunshots are related, but for the purposes of this investigation, I think it's worth it to consider if you know or saw anything around that time that morning. So that's all we have on the update. We'll talk to you guys soon. All right, everybody. Well, we will be back next week with a new case, new questions, and new answers. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. I don't get it. Like, they post pineapple. Only pineapple in her stomach. Nothing else. That's not right. It's just not right. Like, you can say it as many times as you want, but it doesn't make it right.
I know. And they're like, but you couldn't see it with the naked eye. I'm like, that's why you send things off for testing, because you can't
like I
see
said,
everything
if somebody wants
eye.
to say, if somebody wants to prove to me that that report is a hoax, that's fine. You know? I mean, I look forward to seeing it. But just okay. You were excellent.
You are excellent.
You were excellent.
You are excellent. You are excellent. Excellent. No, I'm really psyched about tomorrow. But I'm not nervous because I really don't think we're going to be doing much.
We shall see. It will be an experience for us all, I'm sure.
To say the least.
Watch Yellowstone for free on PlutoTV. All this weekend, PlutoTV is streaming a marathon of seasons 1 to 3 of Yellowstone, the show The Wrap calls a smash hit series. PlutoTV also has hundreds of channels and thousands of movies and TV shows like Mission Impossible 3, Gladiator, CSI, and more. Absolutely free. So download the free Pluto TV streaming app and watch Yellowstone seasons 1 to 3 free.